What's up everyone, this is John with Skate Better, and today we're doing the Plan B deck review. So if y'all want to know why I chose a Plan B deck, you can watch my setup video. But essentially, I wanted to try Plan B. They've been around for a long time. They have some really sick riders on their team. And I was just really curious. That coupled with the fact that their decks looked like they were a little bit more mellow. And lately, I've been skating decks that have more concave and more pitch and things like that, like hockey and primitive. So I wanted to try something that was more mellow, like a girl or something like that, chocolate kind of deck. And Plan B looked to be like a more mellow shape. And I was very excited to try this deck, and man, was it a whirlwind of emotions. And it wasn't like the worst deck ever, but it just had a lot of things in it that I loved, and then a lot of things that I really didn't love. It was like one of the most pros and cons I've ever had. I think what I learned is like, I don't think this is my shape. I think I'm gonna be better off with things that have a little bit more concave and pitch in the future, and I'll kind of get into those reasons why. But yeah, let's get started. So measurements, just so y'all know, this deck is 8.375 inches wide. It is 32.1 inches long, and then it has a wheelbase of 14.25. I would actually be really curious to see what this deck felt like in like a 31.8 or like a 32, because when the wheelbase is shorter, but the deck is a little bit longer, it definitely has an effect on like your sliding when you have to slide your foot to do tricks like that, and that was the biggest issue I had with this deck, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So the first thing I want to talk about is the shape of this deck. So just talking about the general concave and then the pitch. So concave would be this way, like how steep this is, and then the pitch is the angle of the tail and the angle of the nose. So right off the bat, I noticed that it's a very mellow concave, one of the most mellows I've ever had. The pitch is very mellow as well in the tail. The nose has a little bit more of a pitch than the tail, which is usually I find is normal on most decks, but still very mellow to begin with. I had this girl deck that I saved to use for examples in moments like this. And this one has almost the exact same concave. So it has really similar concave. You can see it's, I think actually the girl is even a little bit more mellow than the Plan B when it comes to the pitch here. But it's very similar. It's a very mellow deck also. And the noses are really similar as well. So once again, I was looking for a deck that was similar to Chocolate and Girl, and this deck was very similar and had really mellow pitch and concave. So one of the most mellow pitches and concaves I've had, particularly in the tail, but just all around over any deck that I've skated. So the next thing I want to talk about is the nose and tail. And just giving you an idea of what you're going to get into if you buy this deck or a Plan B deck, I would say it's an average shape. And I said this in the setup video too. It actually reminds me of a baker, but the tail is not super pointed, but it's also not, I think it's easier to see it this way. It's not super tapered, but it's also not super round like the hockey I was skating. And then the nose, same thing. It's not a super tapered nose, but it's also not a round nose. So even like you can see in the girl deck right here, even the girl deck I would say is a little bit more fuller. This is an 825, this is an 838. But I'm hoping y'all can see that. It's very similar, but I think the girl to me was a little bit more rounded than the Plan B. This has more of a similar shape actually in the nose. So these noses were like almost identical to me when I was like looking at them. The wheelbase is a little bit different, and I think the nose and tail length is a little bit different, but the shape is pretty close. And then same thing with the tail. It's like not a super tapered kind of tail, but it's also not like a super full and rounded tail either. So just very similar in shape to Anti-Hero. In the beginning, I thought this was gonna be easier to kickflip because I mentioned that before, just like having it more angled. For some reason, I feel like I don't have to go out to the side as much as when it's a really full shape. But there were other reasons that made it difficult to kickflip on this deck. Mostly just the space between here. So the flat space between the bolts and then where the pitch starts to go up in the nose. It's like longer than any other deck that I've had. And I had to slide my foot up a little bit more. Because I wasn't used to that, like all my kickflips in the beginning were basically rocket. And I really had to get to tell myself to like be patient, wait, ollie, then flick, or really like flick through and down, kind of like down through the board to get it to not rocket. But other than that, I think the nose and tail, it's pretty generic. I would say similar to an Anti-Hero or a Baker if you've ridden those before. Okay, graphics. So let's talk about the graphics on this guy. It has this like blue stain underneath, but the top stain was purple, which didn't make any sense to me. I was like, those are like not, for my opinion, pretty colors that go with anything else. But you know, to each their own. I would say that this deck did not hold up graphic-wise as much as some of the other decks, like the Zero. Someone told me that the hockey decks are dipped. and that's why the staining was so different and weird, and that makes total sense. So thank you for whoever said that in the last video. This deck is not dipped. This deck, like as soon as I started nose sliding, like that was it. It immediately wore down, which is pretty average for most decks. Like usually decks don't hold their graphics, they're gonna get scratched up. But this one particularly was like an average breakdown, you know? Okay, so let's talk about durability and pop of this deck. How did it actually work? How did it actually last? Let's get into that. Durability wise, it's hanging on for dear life, but I do have to say that the pop died a lot faster than some of the other decks that I've skated in the past. Just to be really honest, I'd say after the first 3 weeks, I noticed a drop off in the pop. Usually for me, it's about 5 to 6 weeks in, like usually a month and a half is when I start to notice like significant drop off in the pop. For whatever reason, this bad boy, after like 3 weeks, I wasn't getting that super snappy pop. I was having issues ollieing over my backpack, which is like, usually that's what I do to warm up. I'll like put my backpack down and do an ollie over it. I really had to move my front foot a lot further back on this deck to be able to get the pop that I needed. The reason for that is just because the way this wheelbase is and how it's so flat, it's a very snappy deck, but at the same time, it makes it a lot more challenging to get yield out of the pop because it's so flat. As opposed to like if I had the angle going up like this, right, it'd be a lot higher yield. So yeah, the pop, it's not one of the crispiest pops that I've ever had of a deck. I just have to say that, like my own personal opinion. Other than that though, I'd say it's lasting. I want to be honest, I do think I could skate this deck for another like 2 to 3 weeks and probably be okay. So yeah, one of my least favorite decks for pop. But I would say it's holding up relatively good compared to other decks. It's not anything special, it's like average. Alright, so let's get into the real conversation around this deck. The biggest hang up that I had in this deck, so like the biggest pro was also the biggest con. The biggest pro is it's very snappy. And what I mean by that is like, as soon as you put pressure down and you're popping your toe off of it, like you're gonna get a pop. It's gonna snap. I had almost no ghost pop in this deck the entire time I skated it, and like that was pretty nice. Also, you can see because there's not a lot of concave and this doesn't dip down too much, I didn't get a lot of wheel bite. The biggest issue I had was I just wasn't getting the yield out of the pop that I wanted of this deck. So there were like 2 things. Number 1 was the pop yield because this is just so mellow. Yes, it was snappy and responsive, but like my kick flips, anything that was like sort of like a flipping trip where it rotated this way, and like ollies, anything that goes this way, I was just having a hard time getting it off the ground really high. I really had to focus on like bringing my foot back more to get that high pop and that high yield. And the problem with that, the issue with that, is because there's flat here and there's more space between the front 2 bolts and the edge of the nose, I had to slide my foot up a little bit more, like an inch or half an inch more, and that was just really hard to get used to. So once again, my flip tricks were mostly rocket, which I'm not proud of. And once again, I'm not like an amazing kick flipper. I'm not saying that like my kickflip form is great, but I will say that it made it harder to kickflip and to not get rocket kickflips. That little bit of space, I thought it was gonna help me so much. I was thinking like, all right, I'm gonna like move my front foot a little bit more forward now and have a little bit more space in my stance. But the problem with that is when you move your front foot up and you're doing an ollie, I mean, most of you that have been skating long enough know this, if you wanna go high and you wanna ollie high, you move your foot back. And if you want to go lower, or you don't really mind so much, or you're going really fast, then sometimes you can get away with having it a little bit closer. But once again, for me, I found like for kick flips, I had to put my foot a little bit further back to get them high, but then they were ending up rocket. So the alternatives, I could put my foot a little bit further forward, and they weren't rocket, but they just weren't very high kick flips. And like even in my ollies, like once again, just struggling to ollie over my backpack, I was like, why? Like I've never struggled before so much with that on like a deck. And once again, if I just had a real crispy snap every time and move my foot far enough back, of course, like I could get over the backpack. But I don't want to have to put in extra work in, you know, in like my ollie. Like skateboarding is already hard enough, you know? And once again, I think if you're doing a lot of tech tricks, a lot of ledge tricks, like this could be a really great deck, especially for ledge tricks and nose slides. Because there's more flat here, I did find like the space here is farther too. So I did find that it was a lot easier to like lock in on nose slides and things like that. So the last question, would I skate Plan B deck again? I'm gonna be really honest, I don't know if I would. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the brand, it's nothing like that. I love the brand, Plan B has sick riders, it's just this particular shape did not work for me. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I know that a lot of riders for that team, including Chris Joslin, I'm just thinking of this now, they skate Indy trucks. And Indy trucks are a little bit higher, and they're a little bit taller of a truck, and they're also, the wheelbase is a little bit further in. So like if I had this deck and it was taller and the wheelbase is further in, I should be getting a higher pop out of that. So like that might make a huge difference. And I was really tempted to throw on Independence but I wanted to give my honest review with the setup that I always use. I have this on my 149 Thunders, which are made for basically an 8.5. I have my Bronson rod bearings, my Spitfire conical wheels, just the regular conical 52s, and they're 99K, and that's it. That's the setup. So I wanted to give you all honest review based on the setup I usually ride. I don't think I would try Plan B deck again unless it was like a completely different shape or something, but then even going back to the pop would also make me probably shy away. So I think that's gonna wrap up this review, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this. So I did include a few basic tricks of me skating the deck at the end, just so you can see what it looks like. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and comment. If you have any questions, throw those down below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So close to 500 subscribers. I just want to say thank you for everyone that already has subscribed. I really appreciate all of your comments, all of your questions, all of your contributions to the page. So thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.